Some of those we'll be able to answer kind of as we talk today. Others might be kind of post this Zoom. We'll go in there and answer and address them. And then also, we'll pause a few times throughout the Zoom just to see if there's any questions. And if you think there's a question that would benefit the whole group, feel free to jump in and ask. So let's look at the agenda real quick. We're going to talk about who should attend Transition Day, so you know that, what the schedule will look like, how to prepare for MTSS Transition Day. Using the Royce Transition Report is a big piece of that. And Naomi will give you a lot of good detail around how to be ready for that, how to have conversations around the student data that you'll be receiving and sharing, and then the virtual transfer of student files, which will take place at the end of the school year. I think May 30th, Naomi will go over that, and then any next steps or actions that you need to take. So just real quick, there's two concurrent sessions going on right now. This is for the newer MTSS lead, so you may have been in this role just for a year or two. You may be totally new to it. There's another one going on that is for the more experienced MTSS leads that have been doing this for a while and have probably done Transition Day multiple times. So hopefully this is the right one for you. They're the same information, but this one will be quite a bit more detailed about kind of preparing and how to get your roster ready and what to bring and things like that. So that's the agenda, and we'll go ahead and jump into the first thing, which is who should attend Transition Day. So this will just kind of help you hone in on who from your school should be present on that day, which will be April 24th. It will be here at JDP in room 159. We kind of had some, it was a little bit of a chore to find a location this year, but we finally got that pinned down. So we'll be here at the John D. Price building in room 159. So who should come? So for pre-K, elementary, middle school, everybody must send 1 to 2 representatives. So that says must, and it's bold because it is a requirement that each school send 1 to 2 representatives. So think about the people in your building that know the most information about the students that are receiving interventions and tiered services in your building. So there's probably somebody on the academic side that has that expertise and supports that. Those initiatives in your building, and then there's probably somebody on the behavior side that does similar work. So think about those people that would be most appropriate to send. So high schools then should send, I don't know if we have any high school folks on the Zoom, but they should be sending 1 to 2 representatives to receive the information. So high schools won't be necessarily preparing to bring anything to the table, but they will be coming to receive information about those incoming freshmen. So thinking about those people, MTSS leads should be one of those representatives for all the levels. And then the other one on the more behavior side could be, your behavior interventionist coach. It could be another MTSS lead. It might be a counselor, district mental health, a school social worker. So those are just some general ideas of who would be the most appropriate folks to send. But I'm sure you have in mind already, like those folks in your building who kind of support that work and those interventions that would be good to send. If for some reason you're that person, you can't make it on the 24th, somebody has to come. So just be thinking about who that backup would be, who a good person to kind of step in for you might be. And you may plan to attend and then life happens and something comes up that week, an emergency, or you're out sick or whatever. So maybe just be thinking about a backup plan and who would be good to send in your place. So just making sure that a representative from each school is present is imperative. All right, so logistics of the transition day. So we'll look at the schedule here, but you'll see that preschool is new this year. They've been added to the schedule. So there'll be 15 to 30-minute appointments for preschools to meet with those students that are transitioning to elementary school. So some of those will be, elementary school to elementary school if the preschool's within that school. But then there'll also be some meetings set up with other elementary schools where these preschool kiddos are going to. And then there'll be 30-minute appointments for each school transitioning to middle or high school. So elementary and preschool folks will be in the morning. Middle school folks, if there are any of you on here, you're lucky because you'll get to be there all day long, and we will provide lunch for you because you have to meet with your elementary folks in the morning, and then you have to be there in the afternoon for your high schools to come and receive that information from you. So we can go ahead and click on the schedule. You'll see there are 2 tabs. The first tab is the full schedule. It's got preschool to elementary at the top, elementary to middle in the middle, and then middle to high school at the bottom. And you can see each school has a specific time slot set up, and everybody will have an individual table set up in the room for you to be stationed at. If you're a middle school, and then elementary will come to you, middle, and then high school will come. And so it'll all make sense. But there's another tab where it's arranged, the schedule's arranged specifically by school as well. So shout out to the MTSS team. They do a phenomenal job creating this schedule, which, it's intricate and it takes a lot of work. So Naomi, is there anything you want to add or more specifics about how that schedule works that day?
Just for the elementary leagues, in case you're curious. So it's going to work where middle schools will be set up with the table when you come, and each table will be labeled by the middle school. So you'll have to go around and alternate to tables for middle schools, depending on who is in your feeder pattern and who you'll meet with. If you're meeting with preschool, there will be 5 separate tables that will house preschool and have different schedules at each of those tables. So we'll make sure to have the schedules clearly posted, so you all know which table is housing which conversation. But it's important for you to understand the schedule and be clear about where you're going, because this is a pretty tight timeline of conversation. And sometimes even the 30 minutes isn't long enough to talk about everything you want to. So really think about the amount of time you have and make sure you know where you're going so that you can make those transitions efficient.
I think one thing to note might be that you might not want to print this off today if you're going to print it off. There could be small changes to it. Even after the first session, some schools pointed out some things that we needed to go in and look at, and the MTSS team kind of adjusted and fixed things. So check back on this document, over the next few weeks, and maybe wait a little bit to print it off if you're going to, just to make sure that anything that needs to be changed or fixed is taken care of. But it will be ready to go for April 24th. So, okay, so far we've talked about who should attend, and we've talked about the actual schedule for the day. Any burning questions about those two things that anybody wants to talk about before Naomi kind of dives into the checklist and the documentation and getting ready for that? Any thoughts, questions, concerns?
I have one question. If you have a preschool in our building, the preschool office is the one leading those meetings for the pre-K kids, or am I responsible for?
The preschool teachers will be sharing the information about the incoming preschool students with whoever comes from the school. Is that right?
Yes.
Great question. Anything else before we move on? Like I said,
if you notice that there is a mistake on the schedule, or if we have omitted your school from a certain feeder pattern or whatever, make sure you let us know that. So if you can review your portion of the schedule today or tomorrow and let us know that as soon as possible, then we can make those changes if there are any revisions to be made.
All right, I'll turn it over to you, Naomi.
Okay. So now we're going to talk about what actually do we need to do to get prepared for this MTSS in-person transition day. Oops, sorry. So if you click the link, you're going to see that there is an MTSS transition day checklist. And this checklist will have everything you need to be prepared for coming to that in-person day. And it will also prepare you for the transition of student data and records after the transition day. So we're just going to walk through this list. If you have any questions, please make sure you put them on the Q&A document or in the chat, and we'll monitor those and pause as needed for questions. So beginning out first, you will need to determine who is going to attend the in-person transition. And as Seth said, you want to make sure that you have some backups for that, because you want to make sure that there is a person there to have these conversations. So it needs to be someone who is aware of the students and can provide information to the receiving students. Prior to the in-person transition day, one helpful thing to use is the Royce report that talks about the transition plan. So this is going to be a list of students, and here's the information for how to get there within IC. It's going to be a list of students with an enrollment for next school year. So anyone who is already enrolling in Fayette County Public Schools will be on this list. And it will display other information, some assessment data, some absenteeism, PLP contacts, things of that nature, past enrollments and future enrollments. This is helpful because sometimes kids get into some of our special programs where they've had to apply, and that doesn't happen right at the beginning. Sometimes that happens later. So some of your children may change where their enrollment is. They might move, so it might not be typical feeder pattern. So in interest of not sharing information that other people don't need about students, we want to make sure that we have the most up-to-date list of students who are transitioning to each school. If you have students that are of concern that you really need to communicate with other schools that aren't on your feeder pattern and you don't find out before transition day, we can help you with those conversations if you want, or you can make those conversations happen on your own, however you want it. Regardless, you need to follow these transition day protocols and procedures. So after you've looked at the Royce transition report, you're going to check that a couple of times, maybe once more right before you come to the in-person day to make sure your rosters are correct. And then you are going to bring a roster for each of the receiving schools. So for example, if Bryan Station is sitting at the table, they will have a roster from Arlington, from Liberty, from Maxwell, so on and so forth. If I am a school like Booker T, I have 3 different schools I'm going to meet with. So myself as Booker T, I'm preparing 3 different rosters based on the children that we are interested in sharing data that are receiving tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. I'm going to have 3 separate rosters depending on where they are going, who the receiving school is. So that roster is going to house, and make you make a copy, and it's going to house the just basically a snapshot of information for the students that are receiving tier 2 or tier 3 interventions. Now, some of our students are receiving tier 2 interventions at a pretty broad level. So some people are considering tier 2 intervention to be small group reading or small group math. If you are providing tier 2 interventions for a broad amount of students, that's not who you're going to put on here. If it's kind of a blanket tier 2, what we want to do is students that really need those additional supports when moving up to the next level. So if I'm an elementary student in 5th grade and I'm moving up to 6th grade, you want to think about what are the most important things that that student needs to be successful, because that transition in and of itself is just very different experience than what they've had in elementary school. So maybe they're a student who isn't really a behavior problem, but just has a really hard time staying organized and can't keep up with their work. And maybe you're in constant communication with the parent to make sure that they are getting their assignments turned in, or to keep the parent informed that they have an assignment for homework or that's due. That would be really important information for a middle school to understand, because when that student comes over to middle school, they're going to have a very different schedule. They're going to be responsible for a lot of different things. So that's a really easy way to support a student at the beginning of the year, is if we know those little things about them. Then we have the other side of the situation where we have students who are receiving a lot of very intensive supports and interventions. It could be an academic, or it could be behavior or social emotional. It's important that those get listed on here, and that we make some brief notes about them, so it can be a quick glance for the receiving schools after they take this information back and are trying to think about it. So we're listing all the students that we think we need to communicate about, whether it be tier 2 or tier 3, social, emotional, behavioral, academic. And then we are placing a asterisk in this column over here if they are one of the students that we absolutely want to make sure we talk about that day. There are going to be other students on this roster that we're probably not going to be able to discuss, but they're here in case the receiving school would like to contact us later. We are talking about the high priority, most intensive needs on here, or like in person, even though they're still all going to be listed on here. You're going to put the student's name, last name, and first name, if they are currently in referral and what they are in referral for. If they currently have an IEP but may require additional assessments or testing. If they have a current 504 and you're just going to say yes, that they do. You don't need to put what their 504 is for. That just alerts them that they need the 504. This column is math. So you are going to say, let's say John is getting tier 2 math, and he's getting tier 2 math for fractions. And then he might be getting tier 3 math for operations and base 10, something like that. And here I'm going to just say, you know, he is 2 grade levels below, needs a lot of support in the regular classroom. Then I'm going to keep going through here and fill out all those columns. Now it looks like somehow one of the columns has gotten deleted. We'll make that fixed. So then you're going to have the reading section. So they might be getting reading and math, and that student also might have behavior, social, emotional, or mental health. They might only have one, and that's okay. You put what the student is getting. Remember, this is just kind of a flyby piece of information that lets the receiving school at a glance see who they're getting and what they may need to prepare for. At the top, you want to make sure you're putting sending school and then also putting receiving school, because you are going to share these with the leads or representatives from the school, but you're also going to share them with your MTSS specialist so that we have those in case there's any movement of positions. We will have those here in case the schools need them for the beginning of next year. On your list, so this is the roster. This is a big job. This is a collaborative job with classroom teachers, with interventionists. This is your MTSS systems level team, perhaps sitting down and saying, which students do we really want to make sure we've communicated with the receiving school so those students have supports in place next year that will help them be successful. After you have come up with that, prioritized that, you are going to create, you're going to create a Google folder for each school in your feeder pattern. And you're going to name that Google folder with the sending school and the receiving school name, MTSS Transition 2025. For example, Morton to Lafayette, MTSS Transition 2025. And then you're going to add that link to the top of this right here where it says link to shared Google folder for receiving school. That way, when we get to have the conversation, this entire document houses everything that we need. It houses the students, it houses the link to where I can find their data, and the sending and receiving schools. That's all what you do in order to prepare to get there. Right here is a list of the academic leads for social, emotional, and behavioral and MTSS at each school. There's also preschool contacts on here. And this will give you an pretty comprehensive list of who to share with at each school. If anything changes, because sometimes these still do change, if anything changes, we'll be making some changes to these, but just try to check and make sure that you have the right person to share with before you share. So this is all before the April 24th in-person transition meeting. On April 24th in person, we're all going to show up to JBP at our scheduled times, and we're going to rotate around based on that schedule to discuss the students. Remember that you're going to discuss your highest priority students on your roster first, and then if you have time, you can continue to share those other student concerns. There are some springboard questions, springboard things to think about. that may guide your discussion around these students. Remember, we want this to be a positive and proactive discussion about students, not necessarily focusing just on their weakness of the support that they might need, but focusing on what's been successful and what types of relationships does this child make and need, and what types of interventions and strategies have worked, and then also what hasn't worked. Making sure that you kind of, I don't know that you need to script it out, but you all have talked about it as a team to send to the receiving school and to share. You want to make sure on the day of the 24th in-person meeting that all of those things above are done. So MTSS transition roster has been shared with the receiving school, and the Google folder link is on top of that roster, and any MTSS contact information. So if somebody shows up that isn't going to have that job next year or whatever, a new person shows up and says, oh, I'm here instead of so-and-so, make sure that you have their name and their email address and stuff like that so you can share that with the right person. Then you will also need to share that by adding a shortcut into your school's FCPS MTSS drive. And only the MTSS academic, other people probably, but the MTSS academically definitely has access to that drive. So make sure that gets in there. And we're going to be working with leads to help with them remember. So if you don't remember something, it's absolutely fine. It won't be the end of the world. We just want to try to make sure that we are as prepared as possible so that everybody gets the information about the students. After our in-person day together, where we share this information and we start processing, what do we need to do to support students next year? So preschool to kindergarten, 5th grade to 8th grade, or sorry, 5th grade to 6th grade, 8th grade to 9th grade. What are we going to need to do to make sure that we have in place for students? This is going to help when we get even more detailed information by sharing the student folders, which within that big Google Drive that you're creating. So we have tier forms, and making sure those tier forms are as up to date as possible. This is not the lead's job. It is the lead's responsibility to make sure the tier forms are complete, but it's not your job to complete them all. Your interventionists, your classroom teachers, whoever's been providing those students with that intervention or that service needs to be part of completing that tier form. And on the tier forms, remember that we need as much information that's relevant about that student as we can get. So if you've had multiple meetings regarding that student this year, the problem solving that you've had around the interventions and how they've worked, that should be reflected in that student note tab. And then absolutely always make sure that the FAST or map reading fluency or curriculum-based instruction progress monitoring data is in. We've had lots of situations this year where we have had to take a lot of extra time to go back and find data from previous schools that wasn't included in the transition file. And that really slows down the process for a student if we need to move forward with a different approach for intervention or support. Also, when students are exhibiting behavior problems and things like that, if we don't have good records of whether that's been a trend in the past or whether that's a new behavior, then it really prohibits us from making the appropriate choices for students. So this year, we will be checking the folders to make sure that they have the requirements that we've asked for. So make sure the data, the tier forms, those things are in there for each student. And if you can put multiple years, that's fantastic, especially if it's a student that's been receiving tier 3 interventions and hasn't moved on to a referral process. That information is invaluable to the school that's receiving it. So all of that is done so that this virtual transfer of student files can happen by May 30th. You don't have to wait until May 30th. If you have all of them done, then you can make sure that all of those things are uploaded into that Google Drive that you created. for the receiving school. And you can go ahead and share that and let them know that, hey, everything's updated, we're good to go, and then let your MTSS specialist know the same. Seth, do you want to talk any about the behavior transition plan?
Yeah, I can talk about that real quick. So as you have these folders where you're dropping in, forms and data for students that you've been providing interventions for on the behavior side, the mental health, social emotional side. There's also this behavior or the student transition plan. So essentially, you want to share the information that you've learned about the student, what you've learned about the behavior, their triggers, the interventions you put in place that have worked and been successful, so that the receiving school doesn't have to figure that out from scratch. So it's just kind of a summary of the students' behavior and supports, so that the receiving school can kind of review this and have an idea of what some things they might put in place for, that match up with what you've done for consistency on the student end. So obviously, you always want to start off with strengths. You'll add those. You'll note areas of concern, whether it's, they're off task constantly, they don't comply with directions, whatever that might be. Talk a little bit about when that problem occurs, the time of day, and the activity that the student generally struggles with. And then what are the student's triggers? What kind of things set off those behaviors? Is it when they're hungry? Is it when the routine gets changed up in the classroom? Is it when we transition from one area to the next or one activity to the next? You'll note if the student has had any SEM events, when those occurred. If there's a safety plan in place that you've created and you have in place in your building, you'll definitely want to note that and then share that with the school so they can review that and decide if they need to have that in place in their building. And then just kind of note the tiered services that have been in place in your building, what those are: tier 2, tier 1, 2, and 3. The person that's been responsible for those things in your building. That way, if some communication needs to occur, the school kind of knows who to reach out to, and how often those have happened in your building. You want to attach anything that's important, like any data you've collected. Maybe it's check-in, check-out data, or EOS, like e-goals. If you've got a BIP in place for the student, the FBA, all those things are really helpful for receiving schools as they bring those students into their building. You'll talk about the strategies that have worked, so the school kind of knows, hey, these things have been successful in elementary school or middle school. Let's see if we can continue those things. So it's just kind of a snapshot of what you've done and what you've had in place, again, so that receiving school doesn't have to figure those things out from scratch. They can kind of learn from what you've already put in place.
You do not have to do that. You do not have to complete this whole behavior transition plan if you already have something in place that has those things. Like, you don't recreate the wheel. That's just in case you haven't been documenting those behaviors in one place on the tier form. And it's not clear for someone who's receiving that student exactly what's happened or what needs to happen. So that's just if you need that kind of template. If you already have it, you don't need to redo the work. So by May 30th, you're going to have these files transitioned and you're going to share them with your MTSS lead. And then that gives the receiving schools some time to really think through the students that are coming to them and making sure that the supports are in place for those students when they come. It also provides the receiving school to reach out to the parents and the families and start making that connection. Maybe invite them to summer things that are happening. Try to build that relationship with home before the school year even begins, so that they can feel that sense of belonging and hopefully have a little bit more success at the beginning. Okay, we're going to go back here. Does anybody have any questions about that checklist? Okay. Now you will need to probably process this. If you're new to the transition day, definitely let us know if you have questions. We are here to support you. We will come out and help you get things together. I don't want this to feel like an overwhelming process for people, because it is just so important for student success. And we want to make sure that we make this the most doable, helpful process for people. So reach out. You can find all of these transition day documents at this link. This link takes you to our MTSS website, and you will find all the transition day documents, all the things that we've talked about today there in the second place. Remember that your MTSS transition day in person is April 24th. So all those things on the checklist for preparation need to be ready to roll when you come that day. Your virtual transfer of student files have to be done by May 30th at noon, but should and can be done before May 30th if you have them done. And then the receiving school checklist, that's what you do. You just kind of tell us that you received the information, that you don't need any additional information at this time. Sometime between the end, April 24th and the beginning of next school year, if you need additional things, you can reach out. We are going to hold some office hours on April 17th from 9 to 10. We will hold office hours for anyone that has questions or needs support with any of the transition day paperwork. And then the other option will be April 22nd from 1 to 2. So if you are in need of some one-on-one assistance or any of that kind of stuff, you can pop in there. We'll have several people on those Zooms. We can go into a breakout room. Also, you can reach out to us and we will be happy to come out to your school and work with you in person. Here is a link to the MTSS and social emotional behavioral school level leads. And then here are at the schools, the MTSS and PBIS, the schools that we're assigned to. So if you're confused on who your specialist is, who you reach out to for support, there is that list. We're done. Does anyone have any questions? I know that's a ton of talking and information. Okay, well, we will share the question answer spreadsheet that we have compiled from all 4 of our sessions today. So you may check that to see if there are any frequently asked questions and answers on there. And again, if you need anything, you reach out to any of the MTSS specialists and we're here to help. Sarah or Seth, will you put the feedback survey in the chat? We do have a feedback survey. That if you don't mind to give us a little feedback on what you need additionally, or what could have been better in our presentations, or what could be better in the preparation for planning for transition day. And then we'll send another one out after we do the in-person transition day to get your feedback on that. And if you don't have any questions, we're done. So you're welcome to leave and we will hang out here for a minute in case anybody does have questions.